for
I'm
it.
I'm John Boone, and my title at Burton is Web Development Manager. So I manage a team of how many is it now? 7 developers.
Wow.
Um, they are all web developers on Burton.com. I have one developer who's much more on the data side. He works a lot with the product data. So that's a little bit less of a web developer job, but still kind of in service of the website. My history is like I was a member of the team that I now manage for a long stretch, and then I left Burton and worked in another company for a while, and then came back to be the manager. So yeah, I've been doing this now for I think I'm working on. It's been over 5 years now. I think I'm working on 6, and it's been amazing. Like it's a totally different job of being the manager versus being a developer, but it's a really cool thing to be able to sort of like facilitate an environment where
Yeah.
people can do good work and just support the team. I think it plays to some of my own strengths. So
So this is kind of just like more of an introductory question, but what does a day in the life look like as once a software developer or web developer and now a manager? Like, what would you say a day in the life of the virtual office at Burton looks like?
are you interested in my day, or are you more interested in one of the developers' days, since
Both,
that's probably
either
student?
or, yeah, whatever,
Okay.
whatever you want to tell us about.
All right. I'm going to take more of the developer mindset because my days are really like all over the place depending on
Yeah,
what to do with stakeholders. And I mean, my day is a lot about just communicating with people and having
right,
meetings and sort of facilitating stuff, which is nowhere
totally.
near as interesting as the developers day, so I'm going to go with them. There we do an agile sort of mindset. I wouldn't say our capital A dogmatic agile, but we use a lot of the trappings of it, and the process in general works pretty well for us. So we run off of 2-week or 3-week sprints. And we do, at the beginning we'll do a sprint planning, at the end we'll do a sprint retrospective, and then that kind of dictates a lot of stuff. So there's like whatever's in the current sprint. Sometimes sprints are very heavily oriented towards bug fixes and like small transitory things that we're either fixing, or like new functionality that's kind of small, it can fit within 2 weeks. And sometimes the sprints are very project heavy, where we're working on something that is a bigger chunk of functionality that's going to take more than 2 weeks or three
Right,
weeks
right.
You'll be working on it, but at the end of the sprint you have work done but nothing that's going to get released. So right now we're in a very project heavy mode. With the time of the year for us,
Yeah,
we Burton being who we are, we're a very seasonal company just in general.
right.
Q4 is a giant quarter for Burton. It's the end of the fiscal year, and we run till February. Our fiscal year ends in end of January. So,
Got it.
by end of January, that's when snowboard sales and winter enthusiasm is kind of
Oh
like
yeah,
definitely peaked. So Q4
totally.
is huge. Like November, December, January is gigantic. So for us as the web team, that telescopes back into the summer, where we have a code freeze that we do. So that's coming on November 12th for us this year.
Got it.
So that's because we're e-commerce, because we are so in the mode of just making money then.
Right.
We, we have this code freeze coming up. So all this to say, it's very busy right now. And it's
Oh yeah.
because everybody's trying to get their stuff in before this code freeze day comes. So this is a pretty regular busy time of like late summer and fall. And we're in the middle of a 3-week sprint right now, but basically what happens is we use project management and sort of project tracking tool Jira. And we have a lot of the developers just live in there, and we use that to track all the work during the sort of sprint thing that goes at the beginning. We'll come up with all the issues and make sure that they are like well described and actionable, but really
Yeah,
that's like the units of work that the developers deal in. So
yeah.
a lot of it is we do stand-ups. So there will be daily or a couple times a week at least stand-ups. And a lot
Nice.
of times a typical day will start with that. There will be a roundup meeting of like, what are you working on? What's going on? And we'll all meet via Zoom now with that. We used to actually
Right.
do a standing up one.
Yeah.
We'll talk that over. People will just go through quick 5 minutes each, like what do you got going on? What's happening? People ask questions, talk through stuff. And then the rest of the day would be like working through whatever the issue of the day is. So you probably
Right.
have a Jira issue assigned to you and you're trying to figure out what it is. So, if I use an example of one of the big projects that's happening right now, one of the big things that's happening is we're redesigning the product detail page, which is obviously a hugely important and complex page.
Oh yeah.
So it's got a million different pieces to it. So like I had a conversation with one of the developers this morning about the recommender, where our e-commerce platform has AI fancy stuff that will let you that knows about a customer's usage and will recommend stuff to them.
Right.
So somebody's been working on getting those recommendations out of the back end, and then how you're going to display them to the customer and how you would browse them, how the back end is going to get them. There's tools for the people to tune it. So that's an example. There's somebody who's like spending their day kind of like running through getting recommendations out of the e-com system and showing them to the customer on a web page.
That's awesome. So what I hear you saying is like no 2 days are the same, essentially. Like there is always going to be a different project, a different thing to debug, a different, task, essentially. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
That there's like all these moving parts going on and you're kind of like watching over the whole thing, making sure all the cogs are running smoothly. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would say to follow on with that, one last thing we try to do when I'm making the issues or the sort of chunks of work, we try really hard to decompose them a bit and talk them through so that each one is not like a week's worth of work where you're just going to go off in the wilderness for a whole week. We try to break them down to like a day or less and make the chunks roughly that, so that it's like you aren't usually going to be off doing your own thing forever. There is going to be like, you should spend probably a day-ish working on something, but after that you should have something that's like, okay, this chunk is done. What's the next chunk? Am I going to work on the next chunk, or am I going to hand it off to somebody who's doing the next chunk? So we try to break them into smaller pieces, and that, to your point, lends itself to that sort of like there's always something new, because we try to break them up so that there is like pieces that are digestible, I guess you could say.
Yeah. Do you find that your developers like have a lot of collaboration and communication with each other? Because I think that, something we teach is, collaboration is a really big part of coding and software development, and there's not this solo mentality. Like you have to ask other people for help. So I'm curious how you think that reflects on your team.
Yeah, I would say that is part of what I think you at BCA are doing really well, is teaching people that. That's a gigantic part of the job for us. With a team of 7 people, we're all working on one website. We're all sometimes working on the same page, different parts of the same page. So yeah, this product detail project is, there's one person who's working on the recommenders, but there's somebody else who's going to be working on like the image gallery to, cycle through product images. And there's been cases where you wouldn't think that those two things would fight, but somebody's working on a piece of code for fetching an image and they change how the image call goes, and the recommender doesn't get it now. So they'll have to talk over.
So
like,
it's all interconnected.
Yeah, I did this thing and you're going to use it in this way. You shouldn't have to do anything, but this is what it's doing. Just heads up. There's a ton of that. And it's a huge like indicator for how well a project is going to go. And honestly, in terms of my day-to-day, that's a big part of my job, is facilitating that communication and just making sure it's going well. And making those connections with people, because there's a ton of really complicated stuff going on, and you can't, the times that we have run into like technical trouble or friction that we have to work through is the times where communication hasn't been that good, and people will build something and then it'll have unforeseen implications for other work, and we have to kind of like work out where it is. So really it is the better the communication's going amongst the team, usually the better the project is going.
Yeah, awesome. That's really great to hear. So kind of adding on to that, from an outsider perspective, someone who doesn't work for either Burton or BCA, those two companies seem very different from each other. I'd say one's a snowboarding company and one's a software development and UX design bootcamp. So how do you think the partnership between the two works? Like, where do you see that kind of conjunction of like mind, philosophy, and practice?
I see BCA as a great way to give people the fundamentals, you know.
Yeah.
There are fundamentals in different areas too. You know, there are the web development fundamentals of HTML, CSS, JavaScript. There are the fundamentals of architecture about like what do websites do. There are servers, and then there are clients, and what things happen server side versus what thing happens in the user's browser. You know, technical fundamentals. But I think there are also like teamwork fundamentals and communication fundamentals that are also important. One of the things that I really think is great that you all do, that I think is a vital part of it, is the part where you meet with stakeholders and work through what their needs are and talk to them, talk to non-technical people about what they need, because that's one thing that I think BCA and Burton, we don't have that in common, and yet the challenge is the same, which is like there are some people who are very technical and need to talk about things in crazy detail, and then there are other people who are not technical at all, and they know what outcomes they're looking for, and they have a goal in mind, but they don't know how to get there. So that could be maybe you know, within BCA for curriculum questions and stuff. But it's also true of the vendor thing where, you know, students are working through questions with vendors and trying to find out what they really want. And that's a huge process. But I would say what BCA does in our relationship is BCA, from what I can tell, gives the fundamentals and sort of lays that foundation. And then what it lets me do is, when someone is coming in from a place like BCA, there's a bunch of stuff that I don't have to teach them, or I know that they have those fundamentals, and I can start layering on the stuff that's very specific to Burton.
Yeah.
So someone will come in knowing HTML, CSS, JavaScript, but they might not know anything about Salesforce Commerce Cloud, which is the e-commerce platform that we use. And, you know, the server-side environment is basically server-side JavaScript with its own APIs and stuff to get data about products and customers and pricing and whatnot. So it's kind of like knowledge plus. And what it lets me do is like shave the bottom part off where I know the foundation's there, and then I can start laying on the specifics on top of it.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that's a very astute observation. And I also think that that's something that we hear a lot from our hiring partners, is like we send people kind of at this level of work that's predictable, and you know, it's always going to be the same, and then they can add on whatever tools they think they need, and it's going to be different between every company. I mean, what a snowboarding company needs is going to be very different than what the city of Burlington needs, and vice versa. So yeah, that's definitely very true. So in like kind of like a broader sense, how do you see the world of tech and software development and design and all these things like collide with snowboarding? I'm curious about how you see those two kind of mesh together, because they do, but I don't think a lot of people know about that.
Yeah, it's a unique challenge because Burton is, you know, we're Burton and we're all about going outside and having fun with your friends, and websites are all about staying inside and focusing on the screen. So it is a weird dichotomy, but honestly, that's part of what's kept me at the place for working on 20 years, is those are both fun things, and something that lets me combine them both, where I could be sitting on a chairlift and getting ready to ride down the hill with somebody, but also on the way up be talking about JavaScript or libraries or some kind of weird technical thing. Like, that's really cool to have something that lets you have it both ways in some sense. And, you know, just in terms of business wise, like Burton, along with many, many other companies, probably every other company, is rapidly digitizing, making the shift from in-person experiences, or sort of like talking to people in a one-on-one sort of way in a shop or in a face-to-face setting. That is always going to be important, and the experiential part of snowboarding is never going to change. It's still all about a physical thing. You know, we're not making payments. We're not a payments provider where it's just moving bits around. Like, it ultimately comes down to real physical things. And so the way that people talk about those, or sort of like facilitate those, is digitizing. So it's trying to facilitate conversations around, you know, offline activities and offline purchases and offline sort of things in an online sort of way, because people still are interested in, maybe they don't live near a mountain, or they're in a part of the country that doesn't have snow, but they want to come to Burton and do some shopping and like maybe read some blog posts about, you know, like what is going on with that, even though they might not be able to personally experience it. And the other thing I think too that the web lets us do is talk to people in a broader way than we do in shop. You know, if you are actually visiting a snowboard shop, you're making a choice to do that, and you might have something in mind of what you're going to do, but on the web, we can broaden it a little more and be like, snowboarding is really fun, and we're always going to encourage people to ride, but if you're just looking to stay dry and it's raining out, like, help you with trying to broaden the conversation a bit. And the web, it's a little easier to do that on the web, because you can cast this wider net with people who are just coming to the homepage and are kind of receptive to a whatever they might come across. So it is a weird thing that we're, you know, an offline company, but very digital. But I think that's, in the larger sense, I think that's the dichotomy between the physical world and the digital one is, they're both deepening. I think the more time people spend on screens, the more they need to counterbalance it with going outside, honestly.
Absolutely. So kind of in addition to that, how do you see Vermont as like a player in the emerging tech landscape in the US? I mean, I think, and globally too, I think that we're seeing the world is moving inside and online, and that's great for a lot of companies. But Vermont is such a outdoor state. So how do you think that like we're keeping up with the tech world?
I honestly think that the pandemic and the circumstances that it's sort of like forced everybody into, I think long-term wise, my prediction is it's going to be really good for Vermont, because this is a place where people like seek out, you know, there's a million stories of New York City like stockbrokers who got sick of the rat race there and decided to move here and do stuff, you know, run a consulting operation out of their house in Cambridge or something. And that's been a path for a while for people who were really like directed and could like have the force of will and persistence to kind of make it work. And I think that friction, it takes a lot less like persistence and force of will to make that kind of thing work now than it used to. That's all on hyper speed. Everybody's learned to use, over the last 6 months, everybody's become way more of a Zoom expert. They become way more of a sort of like online chat, you know, just working off your computer and figuring out your work hours. And there's a lot of stuff that still sucks about it, and people are still trying to figure it out. But I think that tendency of people being able to work remotely, and especially with web developers and just development and technology in general, that is going to change forever towards working remote. You know, our team, most of our team is here, but we've all done great with remote. Like there are challenges to be met, and there are some people who are having a really hard time because of childcare or, you know, family issues that are totally unavoidable and not part of technology or anything. They're pandemic related. But with that said, people can work remote really easy now, and the fact that they can work remote more easy means that they're going to want to leave the rat race, I think, more, and try to find places to live in places like Vermont and not feel like they have to spend giant amounts of money on suburban New York or Boston, because they don't have to anymore. So
Yeah,
I
because
think
the people,
demographically it's going to change. It'll take a while, but it's going to change, I think.
I definitely agree. I think that before, people were leaving those cities as kind of like the exception to the rule, and now it's kind of becoming the rule. Like, people are experiencing this like mass exodus from large cities, and specifically in New England. You know, people are leaving Boston, leaving New York, leaving these bigger cities, and coming to places like Burlington, where you know, we're a city, we're not a big city, we're nothing in comparison to New York or Boston, but it's definitely a more attractive lifestyle, and especially for people who work digitally. I mean, I can only imagine that, you know, it's a lot nicer to sit in a house in Vermont than it is to sit in an apartment in New York. So I definitely agree with that. Yeah. So, and kind of like wrapping up here, I know that you attended our recent demo days. So I'm curious about your thoughts on those, and if you could kind of give me a little bit of like your kind of demo day review.
I think they've been amazing. I can't even, if I was going to try to come up with something that could be better, I think I would be hard pressed, because they're really great. I think that, like, working up to the demo day, and the demo day being a sort of like final deliverable, is itself a lot of what makes BCA what it is, and makes it like a valuable experience. Because that whole process, you know, talking, like I was saying, talking to stakeholders, trying to figure out what non-technical people need, as opposed to what they say they need, and then working through it as you encounter challenges and like finish them. And then the end of like having to talk to people about a varied audience too, of people who are your stakeholders for one, but also people who might not know anything about it and are coming in totally clean. You know, being able to talk to people about it that way is all super valuable. And I think you can, of course, there are times when some students maybe are nervous to speak, you know, to a Zoom call, or there might be technical glitches that happen and they have to recover from it. But I mean, honestly, doing any of this type of work, it's the screw ups that make you learn the most, and they are the most painful.
Absolutely.
It's true, but pushing through that and learning that way is a great thing. So I would say, yeah, more demo day. Not like you make that the whole class, but like, I think the demo day thing is amazing and super worth it.
Yeah, I think that, and something kind of exciting that's come out of this whole digital era is that the stakeholders and those project sponsors can be outside of Vermont now. There is kind of this like emergence of like a larger bandwidth for us, because we can, you know, talk to anyone via LinkedIn, Zoom, Skype, whatever. And it's pretty cool to see that happen. So definitely stay tuned for demo day coming up in end of or mid-December. We'll have some more demo days coming your way. So that's exciting. Cool. And kind of a last question, what would you say to other companies, whether they're local, national, regional, whatever, thinking about joining the BCA Hiring Partner Network?
I would encourage them to do it. I think from what I've seen, the students that come out of it have great fundamentals. They come out of it with a lot of, you know, firsthand experience with things that are very difficult to teach, like talking to stakeholders. And that, yes, there's always going to be, you know, like a learning process for someone who comes out of a BCA, you know, because a lot of them are starting from scratch and a lot of them are new to the biz. But that is far offset by the fact that you get people who are super enthusiastic, have been through some hard-won experience already, which is not easy to find, and that they are ready to roll. You know, they want to learn, and they've been through an intensive learning process, and so they come out of it like ready to soak up knowledge, which is what you want in a new hire. So, you know, just that having that mindset of like, I want to learn stuff and let's do this, that attitude goes so far. So I would highly recommend them so far from what I've seen.